Does your daily routine leave you lost in a sea of repetition, repetition, repetition? Hendrick's Gin invites you to leave the mundane and heed the call of your curiosity. Escape the conventional and embrace the delectable. Welcome to the world of Hendrick's Gin. Oddly infused with rose and cucumber. Undeniably peculiar, utterly delicious.
Hello and welcome to Drink, Play, Love, a seminar where we're going to be providing resources and examining the tools with which you can add to your belt to navigate your own way on your direction towards happiness. Now, I'm lucky enough to be joined by some of the most incredible humans on this planet. And before I introduce myself, I'd like to give the panelists 30 seconds to introduce themselves. I'm lucky enough to have Adil, Yamin from Michigan. I've got the wonderful Brenna, McGee from over in California, Jackie Summers all the way from New York, and Nance from Chicago. So do you guys want to take 30 seconds to be able to just introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about where you come from?
So I'm Brenna. I am out here in Oakland, California. So I am an associate marriage and family therapist with a long backstory in the industry of working on the supplier side and behind the bar. And I moved over into mental health full-time a couple of years ago. So I work full-time in residential substance abuse programs and then do a small private practice on the side and try to kind of support mental health in our industry.
Adil.
Hi, my name is Adil Yamin. I have been working in the industry for roughly 15 years. I've worked everywhere from a dive bar to a sports bar to a casino. And now I currently am the portfolio specialist for William Grant & Sons in Michigan. And I'm getting married in a month.
Jackie Summers.
Also known as Jack from Brooklyn for obvious reasons, creator, Sorrel liqueur, writer, entrepreneur, public speaker. If it's oppressive, I want to squash it to the ground.
Last but not least, Mr. Nance.
Hi, Robin Nance. I'm the National Portfolio Ambassador for Bean Suntory, based out of Chicago. And prior to that, I was in the industry for 25 plus years.
My name is Mattias still Horseman. I'm the ambassador for Hendrick's Gin for the Central South USA. And I've been in the industry for going on about 10, 11 years now, originally from England, as you might be able to tell by the accent, where I studied psychology and specialized in psychology of hospitality. Fast forward to America, running a couple programs, and have just always kept that idea of the mental health of bartenders and hospitality workers front of mind. And that's how we got here today to this wonderful seminar where I'm joined by such an amazing group of people. And you know, when I was behind the bar, I used to keep this notebook. I've had several over the years, but I always used to use a pencil, and I used to have a sharpener behind the bar. And the theory for today's seminar sort of spurred on from actually talking about what a pencil is. Now, a pencil has several different qualities that I think relate to us as humans. We have our first quality, as you see now and then you have to stop writing and use a sharpener. See, it makes the pencil suffer a little bit, but afterwards you're much sharper. So you too must learn to bear certain pains and sorrows because, well, they'll make you a better person afterwards. The second quality is that the pencil always allows us to use an eraser, to rub anything out, not necessarily for the mistakes, but it means that correcting something isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it helps us on our road to happiness to be able to create that solid foundation with which we can move forward. Our third quality, and what really matters about a pencil, is not its wooden exterior. It's what's inside, the graphite inside, that really makes it important. So always pay attention to what is happening inside you. Now, our fourth quality and our final quality is that it always leaves a mark. So just in the same way is that you should know that in everything you do, you leave a mark. So be conscious of that as you go through life. Now, I'm privileged to be able to start off this beautiful conversation about how we can maintain a work-life balance in our industry in these ever-changing times. It should be noted that none of us on this panel are actually currently bartenders, but as you just heard from everybody, we have all been very closely linked to the industry for a very long time. And so we're going to be drawing on our experience from our fellow industry, from around that we're watching right now of what's going on, as well as our personal experience, whether it's behind the bar or on the other side of it. And it's also that over the last couple months, this seminar has gone under some different variations due to the ever-changing climate of the world. So we're going to do our best to bring you some resources and some tools and hopefully give you an insight into how some amazing individuals have actually worked through and adjusted their compass on the direction towards happiness that hopefully might help you guys. So to start with, Robin, you have done such an amazing job over the last couple of months, I feel, on your personal journey towards happiness. And I thought maybe you could just enlighten us at the beginning about sort of what some of your goals are when it comes to your own pursuit of happiness.
Yes, sure. Some of my personal goals, and as you mentioned, I feel like everything has shifted so much in the past few months. Not changed really though. So I think that's important to note. They hasn't changed, it's just shifted as to like kind of something that maybe was important but not as important has moved around. I think boundaries have become really, really important for me. And I would say probably the most important thing for me during this time at home has been learning to maybe make the line between work and my personal life a little less blurry. It's been very blurred. And I mean, it's always, I think, most of my friends and people that I consider family, many of whom are on this seminar right now, are also industry. So it is very easy to blur that line. But, you know, really kind of just setting up that time where it's about me and it's about me being in my home with my partner and, you know, dedicating time to friendships and maybe not talking about things that are industry related and having different conversations. Also still knowing that my passion is very deeply rooted in this industry. So that's been definitely one of my main goals. There's a couple others, but they play into some of the conversations that we're going to get to later. So I'll pause there.
No, I love that. And I love what you said about the fact that your goals on your pursuit of happiness haven't changed, but they've shifted because there's been other obstacles that have placed themselves maybe in the way, like you said, with not being able to leave the house. And when you start having those work conversations, they can drag on that relationship for sure. So no, I appreciate that. Now, Jackie, you have such an extraordinary ability, in my opinion, and I think in a lot of people's opinion, to be able to zoom out of our, of the world and look at everything from a bird's eye view, so to speak. Now, why do you think that the subject of mental health and sort of well-being is a difficult one to tackle when it comes to our industry? And then Brenna, perhaps you could elaborate on some of Jackie's points when it comes to like a clinical side of the conversation.
I am a devout Taoist, and one of the things that Taoism teaches is the ability to center yourself in the moment. Well, we work in an industry where we are always being asked not to just look back, but to look forward. We're asked to review past things we did and to make projections on what we're going to do. And everything about that takes you out of being present. As Robin said, something about this time has given people more time on their hands to be present if they have the wherewithal to sit with the silence. I've personally found that to be incredibly useful. I find that if you can sit with each moment, that there's something the moment requires of you and will tell you clearly. And if you can't hear what the moment requires of you, it's because there's still too much background noise. So it's important to know how to be okay with sitting with the silence and hearing really what the moment requires of you. and then responding to that. That keeps you from focusing on what has happened, which causes depression, and what is yet to happen, which causes anxiety.
Yeah, and you raised such a good point about sitting with the silence, which is something that the industry, as bartenders, chefs, frontline people in the service industry, like people aren't used to silence all day and all night. All they hear is noise, noise, noise from the bar. And then what do you do when you finish the bar? You go to another bar, and it's just constant noise, noise, noise. So this time in our lives, the sort of the time of reflection that we've almost had, Robin, as you said, when we've had our interesting things have shifted into our way, we've actually been able to sit now with ourselves and get time to get to know our hearts again, which is great. Now, Brenna, that must be, from a clinical side of things, must be pretty interesting, having this shift, as Robin put it, in sort of how we're dealing with everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what, all three of you brought up is that there is this big shift from the external to the internal. And a lot of what I think draws us into the industry is the energy of the external and the ability to provide these amazing experiences for someone else and kind of guide our validation by someone else's experience. We all are kind of behind the bar or in a kitchen or whatever, some sort of an absorbing platform for whether someone else is enjoying themselves or having a hard day, or whether they love their drink or love their meal or whatever that may be. And so this is a really different shift to say you have to turn inward and say, like, where do I find that internal validation? Where do I gain that from myself without someone telling me that I'm doing a good job or providing them amazing service?
Absolutely. Such a great point. Now, Adil, you've had such a great career path, from starting behind the bar and moving all the way up through the ranks and now coming into sort of, more of the distributor supplier side of things. When you were behind the bar, like, what were some of the biggest issues that you had when it came to dealing with that aspect of sort of, mental health and just well-being in sense with the timeframes that you were dealing with behind the stick?
In the beginning of it, where it became difficult to kind of shut things off from home, then shut things off from work and going back home. And one of the things that I realized is that I have this amazing kind of a thing where most people would dread, is this half hour to 40-minute drive to work, which then turned into, okay, well, I have half hour, 40 minutes to forget about home and be ready for my shift and, serve the people and be as hospitable as I can and not really take what I'm upset about at home or whatever that might be and turn it into what it is for work. And then vice versa, where, I'm leaving work. It might've been a stressful shift. It's 2:00 in the morning. I'm exhausted. And I have the half hour, 45 minutes to talk it through in my head to go home. So in the beginning where, it might've been a 5-minute drive, didn't really have time to turn things off. And, that 5-minute drive led into like maybe a 15-minute bike ride, which kind of helped me, okay, well, that actually gives me more time to turn things off from home or, turn things off from work and going home. So that actually really helped me out personally, like mentally being prepared for my shift and then being prepared to be home with my loved ones.
I love that. So you had that ability, the time to actually do what Jackie was just saying and be present with yourself, which meant when you got home, you weren't, as Jackie put it, living in the past and dealing with something that could have caused you to be a little bit anxious or depressed. And you weren't living in the future too much because you had that moment to just be, which is beautiful. And I think that would actually be a beautiful moment to share with all of you right now, and potentially anybody watching across the country, is just to take a couple of breaths. And I think, at the end of a shift, I always used to hold on to the smallest things. I know that work-based anxiety nightmares are something that are crazy rampant in our industry. I know I've personally dreamt about making 100 mojitos over and over again constantly throughout my life. And, then somebody throws in a couple Ramos gin fizzes and you're like, no! But when you get a chance to just let something go, I think it's very important. So Adil, do you want to take us through maybe a quick exercise in just taking a couple breaths and letting things go that people might have in their heads or on their hearts?
Certainly. And I think, breathing is one of those things that we take for granted. And it's just we breathe all the time, but we don't necessarily properly breathe all the time. So taking a moment and taking like one deep breath is worth, it could be worth 30 seconds of normal breathing. So just, inhaling, letting it sit there, and then just exhaling. And that's something that, yogis will tell you that it's worked so well for them. And one of the hardest things for me ever was to, learn how to breathe while doing yoga. And that's kind of like, in an intense position when you're behind the bar, it's really hard to just stop and take a deep breath. So just breathe in and then let it all out. And that just feels so much refreshing.
It does feel so much better. And Brenna, maybe you could touch on this very briefly, but the idea when you breathe in, you actually engage your parasympathetic nervous system. And it's something that behind the bar, I remember, just like you said, Adil, we didn't necessarily always have the chance to breathe. And sometimes you'd finish shaking a cocktail and you're actually out of breath. But when you're maybe having a chance to stir a martini or to, maybe restock the fridge, it's those moments that you can actually take one deep breath. And Brenna, why would something like that help in the middle of something like a really busy Saturday night?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's, the parasympathetic nervous system that you're talking about. And then there's also the issue that part of why we really love being behind the bar is that energy. And a lot of that is the adrenaline, and having our kind of constant problem solving fight or flight on is very exhausting. And so as Adil was talking about, those little boundaries and the big boundary of time where you can actually have a shift between working and home is one way, but just those little moments where you can get yourself out of constant problem solving mode and engage that parasympathetic nervous system to say, this isn't a fight or flight moment. I can ground right here in the present and sit for just a brief second to allow everything to roll off and move forward. It can be incredibly grounding.
It's amazing little things that the difference that one breath can make to a whole night's shift. It's amazing that it can be a pivot point for you. Now, I think, if there's a summation of some of the things that we've talked about so far, just in the short times that we've had on the seminar, it's that boundaries are something that are super important, and that as an industry, we really we don't lend ourselves towards a healthy work-life balance. We work late nights. We often are finishing somewhere between the doors might have closed in a pre-COVID world at 2 a.m. And then we wouldn't get off until we'd finish cleaning and doing the tills and running the numbers and doing all the things. We'd be home at 5 a.m. It's crazy. But I think in the last couple of months, there's been this energy shift in the cosmos. We have had this beautiful opportunity to sort of relook at our industry and relook at sort of, as Robin said, the goals haven't changed, but they may have shifted. So we have an opportunity to be able to circumvent some things that were prevalent that now we can change and take away, leading to a hopefully better future. Just as with the pencil, we don't necessarily need to use the eraser to erase our mistakes in the past. But if we can create that solid and clean foundation for the future, then we have a chance at success. So Robin and Adil, I'd love to start this sort of next little section we're going to move into just by seeing what some of the current challenges as it relates to health and wellness that you see in our industry in this new world that's been presented. So Adil, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's, when you think of health and wellness, you always think about stress, and, stress can lead to depression and so many different things. And, we can talk on for days about that. But one of the things that I've kind of battled with in working from home essentially is, in the beginning, you kind of feel guilty because you don't have enough, or you forget how efficient you are behind the bar, and you're constantly working for 8 to 10 hours a day. But at home, the amount of work that requires for, like, let's say something administrative or menu building or anything like that, you can get that done in a short period of time. And you then start to feel guilty. Oh, I haven't done enough, or I need to do more. And we're such hard workers that are from behind the bar. And I'm constantly told, like, love hiring, ex-restaurant workers or ex-bar people, just because we have that work ethic, and that just makes it that much harder for us to work the 4 hours that it might take to get something done at home. And then now you're stressed out because, oh, like I didn't do enough, or, it's just not feeling guilty about what you've done, but instead being proud of what you've accomplished in a short period of time.
That's a great point. And, to Robin's point earlier about the goals haven't changed, but merely shifted. How many times did we as bartenders always say, God, I wish I could do this, or I wish I could do that. But because of our time schedules, it was never able or never possible. But now we have that, we can actually pursue the dreams we once had. Robin, sorry, go ahead, and maybe you want to build on.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the challenges I'm seeing with, just through social media and talking to friends in the industry, what I think will obviously not working as its own challenge, and then returning to work. I think some of the challenges that people are facing with the return to a very different, hospitality is all about engaging with your guest. It's all about that interaction and the smile and the, those little like body language and movements and nods and all. A lot of that's lost behind a mask. And while that is the most important thing we can do right now, it's a challenge. It's, I will say, like, I'll go out for, a walk for exercise for 30 minutes, and having that mask on for 30 minutes in the heat is exhausting. I can't imagine working, anywhere from a 6 to 8 hour shift in a mask. And so I think there's a lot of just the general challenges of what a new world looks like, with the protections in place that have to be there, and trying to adjust how you think about hospitality and how you interact with your guests. My partner works in retail, not that different, still kind of service industry, and just watching the struggles that he had going back to work. And, there's headaches, and you can't wear glasses with a mask. And what if you don't wear contacts? And so I think that's a lot of it, and a little bit to Adil's point, I would say from sort of like the brand side. And I don't know if you've been feeling this as well, but I know early on I had immense guilt for still having a job. And that was a real struggle for me early on, was, feeling bad that, and then forcing myself to work extra hard because of that guilt. So that's kind of both sides, I think, from the brand side, and then also what I'm seeing from friends that are going back into service industry.
Amazing. Jackie, you have a great cultural perspective on this as well, because of your sort of, like you said before, your activism work and everything is so profound. And I think the cultural shifts that are happening, again, there's a change that's happening in the cosmos right now. Truly, I feel it in my bones. We as bartenders shake things up on a regular basis, but the entire world is shaking right now. And that must add quite a bit of stress to people as well, I would imagine, right? From many different angles when it comes to a cultural perspective. Do you want to maybe delve into that slightly?
People like the idea of sameness, even though sameness is an illusion. We are standing on the surface of a ball of iron that's hurtling through space at 66,000 miles an hour. It's circling an exploding ball of hydrogen that itself is hurtling through space at 85,000 miles an hour. The idea of sameness is nice, but the reality is change is the only constant. You are changing on a cellular level every moment of the day. So while it might seem like sudden change is jarring and sameness is reassuring, I think the thing that helps people to adjust to the idea of all this change is accepting the idea that stability and sameness was always the illusion. That was always the illusion. And this idea of continual constant shifting, pivoting, readjusting, that's the reality. And again, as we've said before, something as simple as taking a breath can help you to adjust to the moment and tie you back into the right now, which is always telling you that things are changing. You're breathing, your heart is beating, you're replacing yourself on a cellular level. Your thoughts and your senses are different from one second to the next. Change is not just good, change is reality. And the illusion of sameness, while it's reassuring, the struggle most people are going through right now is letting go of that illusion. But once you let go of that, it's liberating, it's freeing, it lets you completely be in the moment. And it's subsiding into this idea of something that wasn't shifting. It's always shifting, and you're shifting with it whether you realize it or not.
There's a great Native American philosophy or proverb that says, one never steps into the same river because it is no longer the same river, and one is no longer the same person either. And I love that, because what you're saying is 100% true. Change is the constant, which is just an amazing thought to have. And you phrased it beautifully. Thank you. You know, one of the biggest things that I've realized from my perspective is that it's ironic that we're having this conversation while we're on a Zoom call, but sometimes I've found myself having so many Zoom calls in a day that I don't necessarily get anything or get as much as I could done. Now, I know that bartenders have had to shift their energy, as you said, Robin, to be from engaging with people to sometimes actually spending a lot of time online, whether it's Jackie with your amazing happy hour that you did with Danny Veras, or, you know, or making cocktails online to try and make a little extra cash with some brands. And it can be very interesting. Brenna, from your professional side of view, how does screen fatigue and social fatigue play into this? Because I imagine if bartenders had this capacity to deal with X amount of people per night, now that we're in a new world where we're not dealing with that, how does that change happen inside somebody's mind?
There's so much there. And like, as I was sitting here listening to everybody speak, there's so many different layers of this. And I think an enormous amount of it is kind of where we get our energy from, and the idea that we don't have the energy of someone sitting in front of us. So like, even this is a really good example. We're doing this seminar to currently just each other. So like, the energy is very different from sitting in a seminar in front of 100 people and having this conversation and being able to read people's faces and kind of pivot accordingly. We don't have that. And there is a kind of empathetic exhaustion that comes with trying to do this online. And I think that part of these boundaries that we're talking about, and kind of taking the time to turn inward and figure out where our own values are, is also allowing for the boundaries of empathy, and kind of knowing that this can be very exhausting, and having a little bit more self-compassion and building kindness to ourselves around not being able to be 100% on Zoom and on social media and like this online presence constantly, because it takes out in a different way from being able to have that reciprocal energy with someone in front of you.
You raised such an amazing point, and I think a beautiful thing to do would be able to weave back to Jackie's point about being present. Now, the term of mindfulness, right, is something that I think a lot of people are familiar with, but don't actually know what it means or how to do it. So, I mean, Brenna, from your experience, is there some elements of mindfulness, little tips and tricks that would be able to potentially just enlighten people as to why mindfulness is important and how people might actually approach the subject if they're not necessarily too familiar with it, or think that it's a very hippie concept? Ironic that I'm saying it with a mandala and tree lights behind me, but I can totally see how people would be like, that's very out there. But it's so crazy. And Jackie, you're an expert at this, being a practicing Taoist. I love that. So maybe you guys could shed some light on the term mindfulness.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll do kind of the layman's version, because I know Jackie can go quite a bit deeper from his perspective as well. But mindfulness is really allowing yourself to be in the present moment without judgment, and building that kind of curiosity and compassion for a moment without having to have one foot in the future and one foot in the past. And so it is a practice. And I think where we go wrong oftentimes is mindfulness gets kind of synonymously introduced as you need to have complete silence in your head. And for me personally, that would be terrifying. I think that would mean I'm dead. I am not looking for complete silence, but I am looking for some sort of like organizational capacity up there. So building that practice, and whether it's through breathing or guided meditations or journaling, or just allowing yourself a sense of stillness and internal curiosity, I think that becomes the practice of building this over time. And then if we tie it back into bartending, kind of this concept of flow, and where we find our like ultimate contentedness is when something is just hard enough that we really have to pay attention and we know we're succeeding at it. And mindfulness is exactly that intersection.
There's a Taoist teaching called Wu Wei, which is complex and incredibly simple. The complex and incredibly simple definition is, by doing nothing, all things are accomplished. And that sounds contradictory, except scientists, thousands of years after this principle was introduced through philosophy, discovered a part of your brain in your brain stem called the reticular formation. And basically, your reticular formation is where all of your sensory input is coming through. So every second of your life, you're getting something like 16 million different bits of sensory information: sights, sounds, smells, tastes, feelings. Your reticular formation narrows that down to the most important things that you need to be aware of. For example, you might be standing in your kitchen, seeing, smelling, touching, tasting. But if you have your hand on the stove, you're going to get a spike that says, pay attention to your hand. Or your phone ringing in the middle of something. Pay attention to your hand. It's burning. The trick to, as Brenna said, mindfulness is to, again, really pay attention to the things that are requiring your attention in the moment, whether or not that is taking a breath, whether or not you've got that instinct that says, I have shaken this enough and it's aerated, I can do this. Whether you're doing a free pour that says, that's just about 3/4 of an ounce. There are all these things that we do instinctively at this point. Like if you've ever driven yourself home and not paid attention to it, you were so completely in the moment that you weren't thinking, you were just doing. And the point, I think, of mindfulness is to move past this area where we're stuck in our thoughts and we are responding intuitively and osmotically and naturally to the environment and the stimulation that's around us. And if we do those things, everything that needs to get done will get done in the best way and in time, but without all the stress.
So Jackie, I know you and I have had this conversation many times in the past whenever we catch up on the phone late night or early mornings or in the middle of the day when we're sitting having a coffee. But how would you potentially advise a bartender to just one activity that they could potentially delve into to approach the subject of mindfulness in, say, the next week or so as they're going through their life? What would be something? I know we've spoken about the idea of keeping track of your core values. As times are changing, at least you have a center point to go back to. What advice would you give?
You can take an activity as simple as cutting limes and make that into a mindful practice. The interesting thing about Zen as a practice is it's not something that you can learn or study like other philosophies. You have to associate it with some sort of a practice. The practice can be calligraphy. The practice can be sword fighting. The practice can be cutting limes. So figure out something that you're already doing, something that's part of your day-to-day life. And while you are doing that thing, let yourself do nothing but that thing. Don't think about the girl that didn't text you back. Don't think about the bills that you have to pay. Don't think about the shift that you're about to do. Do that one thing while you're doing it. That's mindful practice.
I love that. And the example you gave, I think it was about bartenders shaking a cocktail. I think it was either yourself or Brenna. There is that Zen moment that comes with shaking a cocktail, isn't there? Where you know that that cocktail is ready. not because of the temperature of the tin or anything, but you just know because you're in the moment, you have it, you're practicing mindfulness when you're doing that and you experience that moment. I love that. That's great. You know, so we've spoken quite a lot about boundaries today, and I'd love to potentially delve a little further in there to understand how you have all helped shape the boundaries in your lives, whether it's in the pre-COVID world or in a world that does have some more strict boundaries imposed upon it. What are some of the ways that you have solidified a boundary in your life? Robin, I know you gave a great example before about, you know, just being at home, you know, with your fella and everything, but how did you manage to do that?
I mean, I think one of the kind of the boundaries that I set early on that kind of led to the success of that boundary was tied back to screen fatigue, as you were talking about earlier. And, you know, I think, again, everybody was sort of in that panic mode in the first couple of months of lockdown. And I know for us as an organization, it was like video conferencing had been invented as soon as COVID came about. Like, we never did video conferencing really before. And then all of a sudden everything was a video conference. And I get it. Everybody wanted to see each other. And normally you're working in an office. But I set a boundary very well, not early enough, but once I hit that screen fatigue wall, I basically said, if in a pre-COVID world, I wouldn't have been in the room with you, this doesn't get to be a video call. So it's a conference call on the phone if we wouldn't have been in the same room. If we would have been in the same room, I'm happy to do a video call. Also, I don't do any video calls pre 9 a.m. And I'm working with a global team. So I do get calls before 9 a.m. and I'm like, you don't get to see me while I have my coffee. I'm sorry. So that was one that I think really helped me kind of set up additional boundaries within the home. And then also just having, I mean, I think whether you live with a partner or you live with roommates, sitting down and having that conversation and saying, okay, look, we're not leaving. No one's leaving. And this is not a normal situation. I know my world pre-lockdown was never home. I was always on the road and I was always traveling. So it was, you know, my partner having to get used to me being here all the time and me having to get used to being here all the time. So it was two of us dealing with something we weren't really used to. So I think, you know, if whether you live with roommates or you're, you know, person you're in a relationship with, whatever it may be, sitting down and having that conversation and saying, you know, I want to make sure here are the things that I need and here are some of the boundaries I'd like to set. And I would love to hear from you. What are some of the things that you need? And just keeping those lines of communication open really, I think, set us up for success and help. If it's done as a communication between everyone and everyone feels like they're being heard, it's much easier to set those boundaries and stick to them.
And what you say about having that conversation, it's a beautiful thing to be able to actually have that conversation. Jackie, you and I have touched on the concept of something as well, not basic, but something as simple as like toxic masculinity, right? Men have had have been trained by generations to not be able to actually express emotions. And it's something in my relationship, I sit down, we try every week to say, what do you need more of from me next week? Or how can I help you I know you're busy, how can I help you? And it's something that's very difficult to sometimes broach, especially given the fact that as bartenders, like you said before, we wear that mask, we stand behind the bar and we sort of put on a front for people, you know, but pre-COVID, we were already wearing masks as bartenders, but they just weren't physical masks, they were emotional masks. And now, while we put the physical mask on, the emotional one has to come down. And it's, I mean, Brenna, that must be, you know, something that you're having to deal with quite regularly now, is sort of that shift in how people are having to deal with their emotions now that they're confronted with themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Spending a lot of time either alone or with just your partner, certainly. And I've been thinking a lot as all of you have been talking of like, how does this lead to then a sense of happiness, like this goal? And I know one of the things that we had touched on in a former conversation, all of us together, was kind of these layers of feelings on feelings. And Adil brought this up earlier, like we can add in all sorts of then shame layers to, well, I shouldn't be happy right now because other people are really struggling, or I should be producing more because that's the only way that like really makes me feel like I'm giving back in any way, or I should, whatever those things are. And kind of like that layering keeps us even more distant from what internally our emotional landscape is. And so I think like, Robin, one of the things that you were touching on is really taking the time to say, what is it that makes me happy? What is it that I need to protect? Because we have this unbelievably cool opportunity to figure that out. And it is also really stressful to figure it out in such uncertain landscape. But if we can set up, whether it's time boundaries or space boundaries or physical boundaries or emotional boundaries that really protect the things that we cherish and value, then when we start to rebuild what the bar industry looks like moving forward, or what our communities look like moving forward, we're actually building them with kind of that internal foundation of telling us like, this is important to me and I want to hold on to it and I want to bring it into the future.
That is incredible. And I think you raise a great point for a lot of people who might be watching this seminar right now, because what is that foundation? That's such an interesting question. What makes the foundation of somebody, right? And I think as bartenders, a very interesting question for us is, why did we start bartending? So to everybody out there, I would love for you to ask yourself that question right now. Why did I start bartending? What was the reason? Was it the people? Was it the social aspect? Was it the flavor combinations and the creativity? All of these different things play a part. And I might put him on the spot here, but Adil, what was your reasoning for getting in the industry? Why did you become a bartender?
Originally it started off with simply needing money for college, and then that led on to, I love the people. I love the people that I work with, and I love the people that are coming in. I'm in love with mixing the flavors and being like a chef behind the bar and creating new things. And it was just such an exciting time for the cocktail world that it just, everything just came on. And what led me to trying to pay for dental school was like, all right, well, how can I pursue something besides dental school? Because I'm all of a sudden in love with this. And it was just such an accidental thing that, it just picking up a bottle and reading the bottle label and, going back to my dental background and doing the chemistry of the bottle and how it became to a distilled spirit and like the fermentation process. And it just was so exciting to me that it led me to switch my careers or my educational side of it from, dentistry to marketing management to what I'm doing right now.
That's amazing. I love the way that you transitioned your sort of core values of the creativity and the love of the flavor into your old life of being practicing and going towards dental school and figuring out the chemistry of the bottles. That's really amazing. Jackie, you're somebody as well from the beginning of this thing. You've had very strict sort of boundaries with your friends and, with the family as well. How have you found creating your own boundaries during this? And, you're the champion who's always pushed me to be able to use the power of no in my life and, say yes to the important things. And how have you found it?
One of the things that I found happened when people started to sequester was they suddenly didn't know how to manage their time because they had more time than they were used to. And we live in a society that has taught us to value our worth by what we produce. I think it's important, first and foremost, to disabuse yourself of the notion that your value is tied to your ability to produce. Your value is innate. Whether or not you're producing or not, you are who you are. And that does not diminish or contribute to your personhood, your value to society. For me personally, I found it very useful because people suddenly felt it was okay to reach out at all hours of the day or night because time didn't matter, to go, no, I work between these hours. And if you send me an email or a business text after 7 o'clock, it can wait till tomorrow. If it was important, you'd have emailed me during regular business hours. This whole idea that you can reach out to people at midnight because time doesn't matter anymore, don't let anybody shit on your boundaries like that. Like, it's okay to go, this was my work time, that ended, and you don't get to intrude on my personal space now.
Such an important boundary, having that personal space. I love it. You know, when I look back at the world that we had before and when we were all in bars and working in bars, one thing I wish that could have changed as a culture was how I finished that shift, right? Like Adil, you were lucky enough to be able to, and you gave the great example of you made that time that you had driving home, your time to center yourself back to being present, as Jackie said. Now, in this new world, Robin, we've spoken a lot about this amazing concept of instead of just having a pre-shift before work, talking about what's upcoming for the night, actually having something called a post-shift and looking back at the shift and making sure that you leave as much of that baggage as you can at work before going home. Why would that be something that's so important for the industry, do you feel, going forward?
I mean, I think I look back on sort of when I was still working in restaurants, and you know, everybody took that time. You had to show up for pre-shift, and you know, you'd find out the specials, and if there was a new wine or whatever it may be, it was always packed with really important information. And I find that, you know, so much happens throughout the shift, and we become family with the people that we work with. And for some reason, there's really, like, we don't ever really talk about what happens during those shifts. You know, it's like we might sit down and have a drink, or we might go to another bar and have a drink together, but we don't really talk about, like, was it a good shift? Was it a bad shift? Like, did something terrible happen? You know, did you forget something at a table? Let's get it out so that you're not having a nightmare about it for the next 5 nights. So, you know, I was having this conversation with someone, and I was like, why can't there be some form of post shift where we actually talk about what happens? And, you know, I'm sure there's things that will happen throughout a shift where we can learn from those experiences and take it into our next shift. You know, and I think Brenna and I, when we talked about this, she had a great point to, you know, not everybody finishes their shift at the same time, but I still think there are ways that, you know, you could just have that moment, and it doesn't have to be that 15, 20, 30 minute pre-shift that you have. Maybe it's simply taking 1 minute at the end of a shift and writing down one good thing that happened during your shift and one bad thing. And maybe it's on a dry erase board in the kitchen or the break room, or whatever you might have in your space. Just to kind of leave that, you know, like Adil said, he had that drive. I know people that literally live above the bar they work in. So, you know, maybe it's taking that 1 minute to, like, let it go. And, you know, I think for me to walk up to a dry erase board with 10 people's good and bad moments could be really impactful on me. And, you know, I could look at somebody's and be like, wow, I'd like to talk to them about that. And then it connects you even further with the people that you work with.
Yeah, and it gives you a certain amount of enlightenment about what's going on in the environment. You might have thought that you were alone in a situation when actually somebody else experienced it as well. And yeah, then you know you're not alone anymore, and you have somebody that you can go and talk to. Adil, you're somebody who's obviously had this immense experience running teams and running bar programs before. Like, how would you see it working as to have a post shift, and what would be important about a post shift for you?
You know, it's really important to let things go, leaving your shift. And I think Brenna mentioned it last week when we were all discussing something similar is, you know, you might have forgotten to give somebody water that asked for it, and it was like 45 minutes later before you realized that you didn't give them water and they left. And, you know, we're hospitable people, and we get immensely passionate about what we do. And, you know, something like that might make you not sleep well at night, or it might give you like the dreams of, oh, I forgot people's waters all week, or whatever that might be. So letting it go right then and there and kind of forgiving yourself, for example, is extremely important. And then I think, you know, Robin brought up a point like, hey, you know, we can write something down at the end of the shift if we're not going to be there till the end of the shift, or we get cut early. And, you know, a lot of people do, or a lot of establishments do meetings where, you know, you meet once a month and you talk about like what's going to be in the future, but you briefly touch on what happened in the past. And I think it could be important that instead of doing that for the future, you can have a post shift for the week or for the month where you come in a little bit early and talk about, hey, what did you really like that week or that month? Or what did you really dislike that week or that month that we could change to make our establishment better or make the hospitable experience a little bit better? So I think it doesn't necessarily have to be a daily thing even, but it could be a part of one of those meetings that we have to spend an extra 30 minutes to talk about those important things that happened in the past.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting shift, not only for bartenders going back to work, but for management staff. I think the way in which a person is a proprietor for an establishment or a manager is going to have to shift to place a little more emphasis on that emotional energy that the bartenders need to be able to manage carefully. You know, Jackie, what would you say would be something that would be really important to cover during these meetings? I mean, you're somebody who's so excellent at being present, at dealing with those hard hit emotions, and over a shift, things can happen that can be very intense. How would you recommend maybe going about something like a post shift?
Again, it's really hard to do the post shift and find that quiet time because there's so many things that are going on. You're checking out, you're tipping out. There's so much happening. But if you can find time after it's done, just to sit with your feelings, there's a jambalaya, a melange of emotions that you're experiencing. And all of them, all of your feelings are trying to help. All of them want what's best for you. Your anxiety wants what's best for you somehow. Your depression wants what's best for you somehow. But those things, all those emotions want what we all want. They want to be heard. So instead of trying to squash out and not listen and not pay attention and compartmentalize and ignore, to just spend a little bit of time with the emotions that you feel and let yourself experience them and go, I hear you, I acknowledge you.
And you know, as
it'll be okay.
Yeah, you're right. They do speak. And as Robin said, actually, you know, we often go to another bar after work, right? It's not like we finish our night at the end of our shift. And it's like, that's not the only opportunity we have. I love the term bitch buddy. I think it's one of my favorites. And I've had one for a long time, you know, at my work. And I have these friends that I can call upon. I'm like, okay, we need a session. And they're like, okay. And they'll hear me out for all of the craziness I have to say. And with no judgment, they just listen, accept, you get the feelings out there, and then you can kind of come back to your center. And Brenna, I mean, the benefits of doing something like a post shift must be quite astronomical when it comes down to, you know, mental health and the well-being of potential going into the future. Any points about the real benefits of doing something like that?
Yeah, I think we're all kind of looking at how to be really creative about what community looks like moving forward. And in the midst of such uncertainty of what the bar industry really is going to look like tomorrow or in a month or in 6 months, getting really creative about what our community is and what really allows us the authenticity to connect on a layer that is maybe deeper than usually kind of just like going quick to another bar and getting shit-faced at another bar. Like allowing that moment to say, like, this is really my experience. This is what happened. I'm going to leave it here, or I'm going to connect with someone else about it, whether they are across the country or around the world or work in my bar. I think that allows us to be seen in a way that like maybe we haven't been very good at in the past in this industry. And you know, I think a lot of conversations are looking at what has been working in the past and what do we want to bring forward and what really is ready for an upgrade. And in many ways, because maybe, you know, maybe the era of high volume is gone. Maybe this is becoming a more intimate and smaller community industry, and maybe you're only going to be working with one person rather than 5 or whatever that looks like. Then I think it allows us to start to build a bit more authenticity and integrity in our connections to say, like, this really needs to be my family, and I need you to see more of me, because I've now taken this time in shelter in place or quarantine or lockdown or whatever it is where you are, to like really dig into what my experience is, and I can share it openly with someone else.
I love that. That's amazing. Oh. Well, as we approach the end of our seminar today, I invite anybody to chime in with some final thoughts as I just begin to recap some of the biggest points from today. But what we've just heard from the amazing panelists that we have here, who have such amazing experience between them, is that as we're going through this reboot that we're on right now, we need to click that upgrade button as we restart our own internal systems and the systems that we've sort of all helped to create over the years. And I'm very much excited to propose a challenge beside all of these amazing individuals to create sort of a global movement of having a post shift. I think it's going to be immensely valuable for people's emotional and mental well-being to be able to take that time afterwards. So as a group, what we have vowed to do is that alongside watching this seminar, you'll have access to a small packet that will give you details in how you could potentially go about holding a post shift with your staff, whether it be, every night, just a quick handshake on the way out, or if it's something like Adil mentioned, maybe more of during a monthly bar meeting or during a weekly meeting, just but making time for that. It might even just be that one-on-one session you have while sharing a drink at another bar with a good friend. But we've covered that beautiful aspect of boundaries and set the challenge to potentially be able to separate your work and life, make time for what's important, yourself, right? The world is in an ever-changing place. I mean, look at this seminar from our perspective. We've changed it so much since it first had its beginning to where it is now, because the world has continued to shift, and that change is the constant, as Jackie said. But we hope that we have, been insightful and useful to you guys, and hopefully that there's been a couple tools provided along the way that you can add to your belt and your arsenal as you deal with mental health. You see, we as bartenders, we're problem solvers. And Brenna, you alluded to that before about us being that natural state of, if something's wrong, we fix it. We're always going to have that adrenaline going during a shift, that sometimes we need to take that breath and sort of just regroup a little bit. But we are those problem solvers, and we focus on balance so much in cocktails as bartenders that often we forget to focus on the balance within inside ourselves. So as you go forward into the uncertain times ahead, there is one thing that you can be certain of. You have to trust your inner shaker. So you got to shake things up, you got to stir the passion, throw your inhibitions to the wind, and garnish every act that you do with a little bit of kindness. Thank you so much for tuning in to Drink, Play, Love, and I'll open the floor to any panelists if you have anything else left to say for the day before we hit our 60-minute mark.
I just want to say, I'm guilty of this, where during quarantine I've been lazy and just, my pencil, so to say, became dull, and I didn't sharpen it, it just kept getting duller and duller. And I just want to let people know, like, hey, once in a while, like whether it's once a week or whatever, just re-energize or resharpen your pencil and just try to figure out, okay, well, I'm a firm believer that we're going to get through this. We're all going to get through this. And once we do, I want everyone to come back and just be complete badasses. And I love you all.
Thank you for bringing that pencil analogy back in there, Adil, because truly sharpening the pencil is that first step. And just because we may have made some mistakes along the road doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, because we can use that eraser to create that clean foundation for the future that we're trying to build. And what really matters is that the graphite or the lead inside the pencil, not that wooden exterior. So don't worry about that quarantine 15 pounds or anything. It's just what's inside that counts. And our last, anything that you do leaves a mark. So make sure that whatever you do always has a little bit of kindness in there. You can find all of us on social media, and I believe I speak for everybody, but definitely myself, when I'm an open book. If you'd like to reach out between the hours of 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. No, but please, anytime you want to reach out, feel free to give us a shout, shoot us up with any questions. And of course, we'll be releasing a little packet with some information on that post shift so that we can go ahead and try and create a positive tomorrow based on everything that is going on today. Happy days, everybody. Thank you so much to Tales of the Cocktail for having us on. And a huge thank you to Adil, to Brenna, to Jackie, and of course to Robin for being on here with me.